In this video, I'm going to show you how to merge different data sets together. And I work a lot in education, and I know that the education data often comes from many different places. If you have one department's got data on course grades, a different department has attendance data, someone else has the special ed data, a program roster would come from somewhere else. And so you can get all these different data files, but you want the data together in one Excel spreadsheet so you can look at it all together. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do, how to use Excel to pull the data together. You do not want to do it by hand, sitting there looking up to find the student and on all these different lists and then type their data in. This is something that Excel is very good at. But first I'm going to show you what we mean by cleaning data. When you get data from a lot of different data sets or off different computers from different departments, it has all different problems when you try to put it together. But they're easy problems to fix if you just make it a habit. And I work with education data like every day. And sometimes I think, oh, there's not going to be a problem with this data. I'll just skip these steps. But then you just have to go back and start over because there always is a problem. But here's one of the things. Now, this isn't very much data here. So I can easily see that, see how that number is to the left? That's because this number is text. And these other numbers are numbers. Well, when you try to match, which is what I'm going to show you how to do, when we try to merge files together, if we try to match on a student ID and that ID is text in one file and numeric in a different file, even though it's the same student and the same number, you will not get a match. They have to be the same cell type. Another problem is when this person was typing in the school names or the student names, they put a space in front of Emma. And if Emma's got a space in front of her name or behind her name where you wouldn't even see it, there isn't one there. But often, I mean, it's not unusual that people key in data in will put an extra space at the end, you can't see it. And if you go to merge information out of two different data sets and there's a space, whether you can see it or not, it's not going to match. So it's very easy to take care of this. The way you make sure all your numbers are numbers and none of them are text. And if you've got like the whole school system and you've got 150,000 rows, you can't scroll through it and try to eyeball and see if anything looks funny. You have to have a way to do it for sure. So here's a for sure way to make sure all the numbers are numbers. Type a 1 in any cell and then copy that 1. So I use Control C to copy. You could copy from up here. Then select your numbers. And if it's 150,000, you want to either, you need to just do the whole column. I'll just tell you to do the whole column. There's other ways to get to the bottom easily, but okay, so I've copied that 1. I select my numbers. I go to paste on the home menu, paste special, and choose multiply. And it's going to multiply all those numbers by 1. And when it multiplies them by 1, it turns them all into numbers. And see, here's a way to check. If they weren't all numbers, it wouldn't add them together for me. So there's 18 numbers. That's what they add up to. Not that I care because it's student IDs. And here's the average for the student IDs. So these are all numbers now. I've multiplied them by 1. They're all numbers. Here, I don't know if there's spaces after the names. I think there's a space before her name, but here's how you fix that. You do equals clean. That's another thing. Clean is going to take out invisible characters. Some data systems will put invisible characters in that you can't see, but they will keep your data from matching data that's exactly like it. So clean gets out the invisible characters. Trim takes off extra spaces. And I like to do it all at once simply because you can. So equals clean, open parenthesis, trim, open parenthesis, and then click in the cell, close, close. And I can just copy that across and it increments because I didn't put dollar signs on the B or the 2. A dollar sign would keep it from incrementing. and no dollar signs, it will increment. I'm still in row 2, but the B went to a C because it went up 1. And now, just pull these down. And see now, going down, it increments, the number increments, going across, the letter increments. And I want to replace what was in those cells with this. I don't want the formula, I want the result of the formula. So I copy, click in the first cell, because otherwise you have to get it exactly right. But if you just choose the first cell, it gets it exactly right for you. And this little thing, the clipboard with 1, 2, 3, is paste values only. See, it's not the formula, it's the values. And now any invisible characters are gone, and any extra spaces are gone. And then you take down this because you don't need it anymore, and your data is clean. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to merge data now. So here's an example, the kind of thing that we run into in real school life, where we've got a program and we know who's in the program. Here it's an AVID program, and this is all fake data, so there's no FERPA violations here. Everything's fake. But let's say we know that these kids are all in the AVID program, but we don't, and they're coming together for it somehow out of different schools. We don't know what school they're in. We don't have the demographic information here. We want to know whether they're AIG or students with disabilities, and we want this other demographic data. And it comes to us from all these different places. And when we get the data of the rosters for each of the schools, they give us the whole school. So we certainly don't want to go through all these rosters of all these schools and try to find these kids by hand. And this is something Excel is very good at. And here I've put the data all in one Excel workbook in different tabs. But this would work the exact same way if it's all in different Excel spreadsheets. You just click over to the other Excel spreadsheet and it writes the formulas the same way as what I'm going to show you here. And it's very common with school data, education data, that what you need comes from 16 different places, and you've got to pull it together. And you've got to get subsets out of each of the data sets that you are given, which makes it almost impossible to use the data if you don't know how to merge data like this. So we're going to merge on student ID because the number is the number. And if we try to merge on the names, first of all, no matter how unusual the name looks, there's 2 kids with that name. And it's just, everybody's got a unique ID. So if you have the student ID, you absolutely want to merge on student IDs. And that's what we're going to do here. And when you merge data in, you can only merge in data that is to the right of the ID on the spreadsheet. So the first thing we want to do is pull in the school name. And when we look at our school name data, the school names are not to the right of the student IDs. But we can fix that by, let's just paste that column in here. Now we'll be able to look up the student ID and paste in the school name because the school names are to the right. So here's the formula. Go up here in your formula bar and equals, and the formula to pull data together is Vlookup. That stands for vertical lookup. See, it tells you here what it's going to do. I'm going to tell you the same thing, but and when you're using the formula yourself, it gives you little hints like this. So Vlookup, open parenthesis, and all formulas start with equals and they all have a parenthesis, just like functions. Vlookup, first thing you tell it is, what should I try to match on? You want it to match on this student ID, so click on it. I want to match on what's in column C, comma, and comma between things that you're telling it. Now you tell it, where do you want me to look? So click on the school name tab, and we want it to look, and here you choose the entire block of The first column has to be the IDs because that's what we're looking for, is the ID. And then you have to select all the data you might want to return, but here we only have school. So we select, they call this the array. Okay, so from D1 to E98. And if it were a humongous data set, I would do it a different way. I would just go like D1 to E9, and then I would put zeros on that 9 to make it 90,000 or whatever it needed to be. I wouldn't actually try to select it like that. And we want that array to not increment. Well, actually, yeah, just to be safe. Put $signs. If we paste this formula down, we do not want it to suddenly start at D2 and go to E99. We want it to stay frozen. The $signs freeze where you're at. Okay, so that freezes where to look from D1 to E98. And then, so that's what it's gonna look at the number in C2, and it's gonna find it in column D. And then when it finds it in column D, now we have to tell it, what do we want you to give us when you find that number? And we want it to give us the second thing. We're looking in this 2-column box. This is column 1, this is column 2. We want us to give us what's in column 2. And then we have to write the word false, because if we don't write false, if it can't find our exact student ID, it'll give us the closest number to that student ID, and we don't want that. We don't want an approximate match. We only want exact matches. So that's why you have to put false. And then there you go. He goes to Lincoln. And now we can pull this down. Got those zeros because I multiplied by 1. There you go. And it found the kids, and those are the schools they go to. Now, let's go do the same thing, only here we're going to look for all the demographic information. Equals Vlookup. Look up what is in column column C. And we need to freeze that C with a $sign, because this demographic data is all together in one spreadsheet. So we're going to write the formula and then pull it across. And we don't want the C to go to increment to DE, because then we'll get a bunch of non-matches. So freeze the C. Now, where do you want me to look for that ID? I want you to look in the demographic tab. And we have to start with the first column that we choose has to be where it's going to try to match. So we want it to look in here. And it's small enough data set I can actually just select the whole thing. But like I said, if it went from C1 to K 150,000, I would just write 150,000 after that K rather than pull down. And you always want to freeze the entire array, because you don't want that incrementing. You're always looking out of that box. So put $signs. The $signs freeze it. As we increment, we're always going to be looking in C1 to K98. And then what do you want it to return when it finds a match on that ID? This is the array that it's looking in. This is column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. Well, we are in the gender column, which is column 2 of this array, so we want it to return what's in column 2, and then false. Don't give me any approximate matches, I only want exact. And so they found him, and it's a male. Now let me show you a trick here that it's a toss-up with this small amount of data that you're bringing in, but sometimes you've got a lot of data, and it makes it super tedious to take the formula that's here. See, we can paste this across, but the 2 stays 2, and there's no way to make that increment. And so it's giving us what's in the second column for each, and you'd have to go through and hand change that to 3, to get the race, and then change that one to 4. And sometimes you've got like 30 of these and you lose track. And so here's a little trick I'm going to show you. If you insert a row above there, and if you can't insert a row, it's probably because you multiplied an entire column by 1 and you've got zeros down to the infinity of the spreadsheet, and so it won't let you add one more row. So if you get an error message that you cannot add a row, go delete some of your extra zeros that is below all your data. Okay, so if we put a 1 and then equals 1 plus, that's times 1 plus the guy in front of me, and then you can pull that across, and then each one of those is 1 plus the guy in front of me, see? So we needed to start with 2 because this starts with the second column is our 2, so make that a 2. And now here we need that to be the third column. If we take this, instead of writing the number 3, if we click up there, G1, now as we pull this across, that G will increment. And see, it's H1, and H1 is 4. I1 is 5, and that just makes it a little bit less tedious to do this. But you may notice I didn't put $signs on this. If I pull this down, it's gonna, it needs to be 6 every time. I don't want that 1 to increment in every case here. Let me go back here and put a $sign on that 1 and pull that across. And I believe now, if I pull this down, that I already did the 2, so it just doesn't matter. If I double click on this, it'll fill down. Okay, so these filled down. And if you check, we're in row 4. It's telling it to match on C4. You know, just check just to make sure that you didn't like get off by 1 or something. So you're in row 9, it's checking on 9. You don't want to bring in some other kid's data. And here we go column G, H, I, etc. And now we want to get how many days absent out of yet a different place. And the same thing, equals Vlookup. Look up what's in there. And since we're only bringing one thing in, we're not going to paste it across, so we don't need to worry about the $signs. So look up what's in C3 and where, over here. I need the IDs first. Ooh, I saw an ID that is not a number because I didn't clean my data. So I'll show you what happens and then how you check it. You need $signs on your array, and the days absent are the second column of this array, where the IDs are always 1. This is 2. So we need, give me in the second column after you find my ID. And I'm going to just pull this down. Okay, so it didn't find a couple people because they didn't happen to be in that data set. Everybody who it did find, we now have what school they're in, all their demographic information, and their days absence all together in one place, pulling it in by the computer doing it for you so that it doesn't take 8 hours a day for a week to pull this data together. And it's also far more likely to be accurate. And then when you get your data set done, you don't want to work with data that has these formulas in it, because if that gets removed, I mean, it's pulling them in from these other places every time you open this. And if something happens to these, this data set's going to get messed up. So after you get your data the way that you want it, just select the whole sheet and copy it. And then paste special values only, and now you've got the values instead of the formulas, and you're not linked to the places where the data came from.